Defiance Industry presents Hesperus II and You, a documentary outlining everything a prospective client needs to know about the premier industrial world and the men and women who built it. In our short time together today, we'll build a basis for understanding of just what has made Defiance Industries on Hesperus the gold standard for Battlemech, vehicle, and battle armor production, not just in the Lyran Commonwealth, but across the Inner Sphere and beyond. Before the Steel and Fire. At a glance, Hesperus II would seem an unlikely candidate to end up one of the most important worlds in the Inner Sphere. As a rocky planet in the second position in orbit around an F24 star, Hesperus could have been overlooked as just another marginally habitable world by the early explorers striking out from Terra's embrace. Hesperus has at various times been described as looking like a dried-up apple, a wasteland, and even a quote, 80-year-old lady of easy virtue, which is about as randy as we're going to get in this instructional video. Still, the history is the history, so we move forward. Though the planet has 4 continents, a breathable atmosphere, and Terran-equivalent gravity, much of the equatorial region is uninhabitable due to temperatures which could reach 85 degrees centigrade. For the most part, people preferred the northern regions, where temperatures were not quite so oven-like. The larger northern inhabited continent was named South Whitman and became the choice location for early colonization. A smaller, more northerly continent was named North Whitman, which explains the naming scheme. On South Whitman, the foundations for a planetary capital were set into the tillable soil on a river near the west coast. The city was named Maria's Elegy, and almost all of the planet's inhabitants would live within it or in nearby satellite settlements and factory complexes. It didn't take long for the surrounding hills to show the results of intensive terracing so that the settlement could become self-sustaining. Unlike many planets in the Inner Sphere that would eventually support populations counted in billions, Hesperus's native population was typically counted in the tens of thousands. By 2271, Hesperus was officially recognized as settled. For many years, the planet's potential would go unrealized as humanity spread further and further across the stars. But of course, that would all change with the development of a brand new technology that would remake mankind's historical path. Swept up in events. The late 23rd century saw remarkable development in the systems surrounding Hesperus, as political forces aligned and Hesperus II was wrapped up in the new Federation of Sky, which spread out across dozens of worlds. Increasingly penned in with settled space, merchant fleets and industrial interests began to look at worlds within the Federation to develop. The industrial seed was planted on Hesperus, and in time it would grow. The formation of the Lyran Commonwealth overtook the Federation of Sky, and in 2341, Hesperus was for the first time considered a Lyran world. It would be held for all but a few years over the next 8 centuries. Of course, that wouldn't mean the planet would go uncontested. But before falling down that rabbit hole, we need to know why this planet with a tiny population became the ultimate prize. The development of the first Battlemech by the Terran hegemony was a catalyst event which upset the balance of power in the Inner Sphere. After centuries of dominating the battlefields of Terra and beyond, the mainline tank's power had paled in comparison to the Battlemech. The hegemony could now project power that outmatched any the great houses could muster, and considerable effort on their part was put into obtaining the technology for themselves. The 2443 reveal of the Maquis spawned a wave of increased hegemony production of it and similar designs. The clock was ticking, and if the hegemony wanted to maintain its technological edge over the other states, it needed to continually invest and improve on mech production. This led to the decision to rekindle the hegemony's interests in planets like Hesperus II, where production facilities could be set up and operated without having to worry about the security risks that billions of residents brought with them. A small population of workers could be more easily wrangled, and the secrets of the Battlemech could be kept out of the hands of the great houses a little longer. So while it may seem silly at a glance that the Terran hegemony would build a Battlemech factory in Lyran space, it made sense when you consider the details. The production lines on Hesperus were set up in the mountains just outside the capital with high security and seemingly impregnable processes to prevent leaks. The most obvious candidate to make an attempt at securing the technology were the Lyrans, who at least had some pretense for being on and around Hesperus II. Just 2 years after the introduction of the Maquis, Archon Catherine Steiner peacefully transitioned power to her son Alistair Marsden Steiner, handing over a realm that was facing many challenges. The Draconis Combine had taken multiple Tamar-packed worlds without substantive response, while the Free Worlds League pressed in from the other direction. the Lyran military brass faced continual issues with poor decision-making and tactical ignorance. If the realm was to survive, Archon Alistair had to take bold action. In 2455, the Lyrans launched an audacious plan carried out by a colonel named Simon Kelswa. Under the cover of a dropship losing control due to technical difficulties, the team was inserted into the Battlemech complex in just about the least subtle way possible. Workers of the plant fled for their lives as the dropship's pilot carried out a controlled crash which allowed the insertion team to survive and quickly infiltrate the building's computer systems before security and rescue teams could arrive. Enter the mech. You have to question the sanity of anyone who claims that history is filled with honor and moral deeds. Either the man is a lunatic or is too stupid to understand what historians throughout the ages have been trying to say. From Shards of the Mirror, History of the Future's Reflection by Thalos Auburn, Commonwealth Historical Press, 3023. Within 2 years of the Hesperus raid, the Lyran Commonwealth was building their own Battlemech production lines on Nalarian and Coventry. The genie was out of the bottle, and now it was just a matter of time before all of the great houses were making their own Battlemech designs. And all of it stemmed from the unlikely, ugly, rocky world of Hesperus. In 2459, Lyran Battlemechs marched against the forces led by the bloodthirsty giant General Geralk Merrick, who had earned a nasty reputation for his brutality and flagrant disregard for accepted conduct in war. On the Lyran world Lorik, the Merrick offensive ran into a brick wall of Lyran Battlemechs. Just a company of mechs tore through the Merrick armored regiment. The look of disappointment on Geralk Merrick's face must have been memorable, but all the histories would focus on was the Battlemech foot that smashed him into the dirt. Though you may not have noticed, Battlemechs became a pretty big deal in the following centuries. Even after the formation of the Star League, with all the pomp and circumstance of a golden age of humanity, everyone and their aunt wanted a regiment of Battlemechs on their beck and call. Ownership of the always expanding Battlemech production facilities on Hesperis II first transferred between the Terran hegemony to the Star League, and then with the collapse of the League itself, the Lyran Commonwealth stepped in to take full control. The company formed to keep the lines running was named Defiance Industries, or DefHes, to differentiate it from the company's assets on other worlds like Tharkad and Farillo. In addition to the main Defiance complex, dozens of other companies and subcontractors built up in the surrounding area, including Doring Electronics, which earned a good reputation for high-quality sensor packages. The Lyran noble family put in charge of keeping it all on track was House Brewer, who are as frequently mentioned with Defiance on Hesperus as the mechs they produce. Originally just administrators, the family had become de facto rulers of the planet, which relies almost entirely on Defiance to survive. The Brewers were successful partially through steady and savvy leadership, but more importantly, they showed an ability to navigate the complicated inner-sphere politics while still maintaining a strong support from the Lyran state. The fact that the mech production lines had to be maintained and running at all times likely prevented some drama from making landfall. Over the centuries, the operation on Hesperus would dominate the company's holdings, not just in production capacity, but also research and development and administration. As with any valuable industrial site, there needed to be security and defense for those who might take what doesn't belong to them. The defense of Hesperus has always been a mixture of direct Lyran military support and Defiance's self-protection force, often shortened to DSPF. Defiance units consisted of infantry, security units, tanks and vehicles, and even some Battlemechs pulled from the company's production. At various points in the timeline, the units were described as fielding red and white or red and gold color schemes for their uniforms and equipment. Hard times. The collapse of the Star League ushered in centuries of conflict which threatened the very existence of civilization. Many planets were rendered uninhabitable with weapons of mass destruction wielded by those who rationalized their actions with declarations that they were simply doing it before the enemy could do it first. In the early years of the First Succession War, border worlds between the Great Houses were the setting of climactic battles between warships and hordes of Battlemechs collected in the decades leading up to the fight to end all fights. Though Hesperis II would be fought over, a lot, in the coming centuries, the level of violence tended to be restrained. This was not due to any honorable design to protect human life or hold to a moral code. Rather, the possession of the Defiance complex and support factories presented a prize too valuable to destroy. As the Great Houses expended countless lives and ammunition trying to wrestle systems away from each other, they were depleting their stocks of ships, battlemechs, and ammunition far faster than they could be replaced. The scale of the fighting shrank over the years, and the importance of industrial worlds like Hesperus increased. Control of those worlds could make or break a realm. The First Succession War arrived on Hesperus' doorstep in late 2787 when a large fleet of Draconis Combine ships jumped into the system. Operation Broken Blade sought to take advantage of the Lyran focus on the border with the Free Worlds League to hit the industrial world when it was less defended. The fleet included the 5th and 8th Sword of Light regiments along with the 18th Dieron Regulars and a mercenary unit known as the 52nd Heavy Assault Regiment. The plan was to run and gun through the Hesperus space defenses in order to drop the ground forces onto the planet's surface so that they could raid the Defiance factory complex. Easy, right? Unfortunately, things started to rapidly fall apart for the Combine fleet as they discovered that the Lyrans had not pulled significant fleet resources from the system. Instead of a sparse defense, the Dragon's ships faced down a Lyran fleet that included roughly 30 warships of various types and strengths along with 50 assault dropships and 20 fighter carrier ships packed with aerospace fighters. Taisho Hiroshi Pedersen's fleet had suffered significant degradation following the battle for Skandia, and there was very little he could do in the face of such opposition. Still, the Caretans were not known for cutting and running, even when it makes tactical sense to do so he pushed forward with the operation. An attempt by the Caretans to form a wedge formation with their ships to split the defending Lyran forces struggled as the Lyran admiral in charge of the fleet, one Luther Weisskopf, had arranged his superior numbers into a thicker, mutually supportive line, which could endure the pressure. They focused their fire on the larger Combine ships while taking advantage of a highly mobile group of Corvette-class ships. Though the DCMS forces were able to land a majority of their troops on the surface of Hesperus, it came at a tremendous cost and left the ground units without orbital support. The landings were scattered and disorganized, which further delayed the raid and offered the defenders additional time to prepare. Combine forces had to contend with a complex web of defensive fortifications on the outskirts of Maria's Elegy and the Defiance complex itself. As the only target on the planet, the Lyran and Defiance units could concentrate their efforts to create killboxes and zones for zeroed-in counter-fire. The mountainous terrain compounded the misery for the Combine forces, which dropped far faster than the defenses did. In an act of frustrated petulance, Taisho Pedersen sent a contingent of his remaining warships to destroy the orbital facilities above Hesperus. At least some damage would be recorded in his reports to the DCMS brass. With its ground units incapable of breaching the defenses and being outnumbered and outclassed in space, the Draconis Combine's raid proved a failure. In what became known temporarily as the Battle of Hesperis II, and later the First Battle of Hesperus, the Lyrans had proved their mettle. In mid-January of 2788, the DCMS forces retreated, leaving the 18th Dieron Regulars obliterated along with their mercenary support. The naval fleet was devastated, and just 12 Combine warships were in any condition to jump from the system and return to friendly territory. It was such a resounding victory that the Lyrans did not chase the retreating enemy and compound their humiliation. The loss in the Hesperus system, combined with a similar debacle in Skandia, resulted in a complete shift in focus by the Combine away from fighting the Lyrans and instead focusing on pummeling the Federated Suns. As it turned out, reinforcing Hesperis II from attack proved to be an inspired idea, as the failed Combine raid was just the first of 3 subsequent fights over the system. In the years immediately following the collapse of the Star League, Defiance and Lyran brass shifted much of the production capacity into the Mayu mountain range. Everything that could be moved underground would be, leaving only transportation hubs and other essential buildings in place. The cost of destroying the mech production lines on Hesperus was to be so high that not even the might of a great house could crack it without taking terrible losses. The hypothesis was supported through data generated in the first fight against the Combine, and then again in April of 2788 when a fleet bearing the Federated Sun's sigil jumped into the system. If you're keeping an eye on the timeline, that is just months after the Combine raiding fleet was sent packing. Operation Brass Ring was a Davion raid designed to take advantage of a large number of faster, lighter battlemechs which could quickly overwhelm defenses, hit major targets to disable the production lines, and escape before being wiped out. The motivation for the raid has baffled historians over the centuries, as at that point the Lyrans and the Davions hadn't been in direct conflict, and both had other much more serious enemies on their borders. In almost a recreation of the Combine assault, the Defiant fleet was outmassed and outgunned by the Lyran naval assets still in the Hesperus system. The Defiant commanding officer tried a series of hit-and-run maneuvers to pull the Lyran ships out of position, in the process sneaking through the landing craft. It was partially successful, and the Defiant dropships were able to land and deploy their light Battlemech units. Unfortunately for those mech warriors, the LZ was 70 kilometers from the first targets, which gave the defensive forces adequate time to shift units and concentrate fire. The Defiant raiding party was wiped out before they even stepped a single mech's foot inside the Defiance complex. Forced into retreat, the Defiant commander could only mark up a kill of a single Lyran cruiser and moderate damage to 6 more warships. The retreat from the system left an impression, and in order to save face, the Defiants were ruthless when jumping into the Thorin and Rocky systems. These Lyran worlds were not as heavily defended, and as a result, the local populations suffered. On Rocky, Lyran troops were already deployed on a hunt for lingering Ameris forces, and the three-way conflict resulted in widespread use of nuclear weaponry and left the planet's major cities charred ruins. There was a third attempt to upset Hesperis II's production in March of 2789, less than a year after the Defiant debacle. The Free Worlds League decided they wanted to take a crack at it and sent a fleet into the Hesperus system that consisted largely of just naval assets without bothering with ground troops. Free from the constraint of trying to ferry troops and to support a landing, the Free Worlds League ships intended to pummel industrial sites from orbit. Having seen the intel from 2 previous strikes, the fleet's commander, Admiral Thaddeus Merrick, understood that a traditional assault or even a raid was unlikely to succeed. The more blunt and violent course of action was the only realistic scenario. Using a Lagrange jump point to leap the fleet into the system, the Free Worlds League ships raced towards Hesperis II in a mad dash to cause as much damage as possible before the Lyran assets in-system could respond. This relied upon several assumptions. The first was that the much closer jump could be carried out by the large fleet without serious mishaps, and the substantial numbers of Lyran ships would be placed too far from the planet to provide immediate defense. Fortunately for the Lyrans, the Free Worlds League fleet chose an unfortunate time to make their leap into the system. Not only was most of the Lyran fleet still in orbit around Hesperis II, 2 additional cruisers, the Aegis-class Granite and Endeavour, had just jumped into the system and were already on their way to the planet. When the word reached the commanding officer of the Granite, he ordered an in-system jump with both cruisers to Hesperis II's Lagrange point. They arrived just as the Free Worlds League fleet was smashing into the Lyran defenders already in orbit above the planet. In the resulting chaos of large-scale orbital naval combat, the 2 fleets hammered each other in a desperate fight for survival. The Granite and Endeavour joined the fight against the pair of House Merrick cruisers named Devastator and Skulker. The massive ships poured fire into the hulls of their opponents, and each took catastrophic damage. When the Granite suffered a magazine explosion and was clearly on the losing end of the fight, the ship's commander ordered a ramming attack against the Devastator, which disabled both ships and sent them into a degrading orbit toward the planet's surface. The Lyran Endeavour won out its brawl with the Skulker, but was unable to aid in the defense of its sister cruiser. With his assault fleet scattered, having taken heavy damage, and with more Lyran dropships rising from the planet's surface, Admiral Merrick was forced to concede the plan had failed. He made the call, and the surviving Free Worlds League ships disengaged and fled from the fight. The Third Battle of Hesperis II had once again ended with the attackers rebuffed. As the First Succession War ground into a stalemate, each of the Lyran Commonwealth's most prominent enemies had had to learn a painful and expensive lesson about trying to hit an enemy at their strongest and most obvious location. The ability of the Lyrans to dig in and present a consistent strong defense made attacks on the system far too expensive to justify. What a shame that that lesson would not be remembered for very long. A second bite at the apple. After a brief lull in the conflict, the great houses licked their wounds and sought to rearm. The brutality and destruction of the First Succession War did not create an understanding that it was detrimental to enter into such conflicts for all involved. Rather, the leaders of the Inner Sphere saw the destruction of their own forces as temporary setbacks, while the carnage dished out against their enemies presented future opportunities. The Second Succession War began as a continuation of the first, no surprise, with small raids and mishaps turning into excuses for larger action. Hesperis II again became a target in the coming decades, with a Draconis Combine raid in 2838 that failed to cause substantive damage, and then again in 2853, where the Kuretans organized a massive three-wave assault on the planet. Each time the attackers were repulsed, but at great cost to both sides. In the latter assault, the last of the Combine's warships was brought into play in order to establish and hold a siege over the planet. 6 Battlemech regiments, along with a large force of conventional armor and infantry, deployed on the planet's surface. At this point in the timeline, this attack was the closest that any of the foes of the Lyran Commonwealth had come to either occupying or destroying the Defiance complex. In the last-ditch attempt to repulse the attack, Defiance factory managers called for volunteers and even instituted conscription amongst the workforce to man the defenses. Employees were quickly trained how to pilot the factory's recently constructed battlemechs and informed that they were not just fighting for the company, but for their own lives. This ad hoc defense unit was given the name Force of Last Resort, and they adopted a goofy comic magazine mascot from ancient Terra, along with his tagline, "What Me Worry." Gallows humor really is the best. With the Force of Last Resort manning the Defiance complex, 3 veteran regiments could move more freely and hit the Combine forces as they tried to make their way up into the mountain passes. Every centimeter of ground was fought over, and the defenders held out against 2 major waves of attacks before the reinforcements shattered the assault. The arrival of the legendary Lyran battlecruiser, the LCS Invincible, was an unexpected boon, as the ancient ship was thought to be a museum piece in orbit over Tharkad. The reinforcing Lyran fleet broke the Combine blockade and were able to deploy relief forces on the planet's surface. Now outclassed on the ground and in orbit, the Combine attack fell apart. An additional Kuretan raid in 2957 was more successful only because it recklessly dropped mechs directly onto the Defiance complex. While many of the dropped battlemechs were damaged or stranded on the terrain on arrival, enough were able to function to degrade Defiance's production by 50% in the following years. It took 2 decades for the repairs to bring numbers back to their previous level. Still, Defiance and Hesperis II persisted. Though the Lyran Commonwealth would suffer greatly across worlds like El-Hilah, Orestes, and Sakhalin, the defenders of Hesperis II held their ground. It had to if the realm was to survive. A decade after the nearly successful Combine assault on the planet, the Second Succession War officially ended in 2963, not with victory parades or celebrations, but just from sheer exhaustion. There were other raids on Hesperus, and by the time the war ended, historians had to record the details from the 6th, 7th, and 8th Battle of Hesperus, and they tended to all fall into a usual pattern. The attackers would achieve nominal gains like landing their force on the surface, but the lack of warships moved orbital bombardment off the table, requiring head-on assaults on the Defiance complex, which proved costly every time. The 9th Battle of Hesperus had done considerable damage, but it had been a reckless act of self-deletion for the forces involved. A few of the attacks did make inroads, bloodying the planetary defense force as well as the Force of Last Resort units, but each time the damage done to the production lines was repairable and rarely worth the cost of the assaults. Each time Hesperis II held out, the Lyran Commonwealth's government spread propaganda to rally the people. If Hesperis II could hold out against the might of the great houses, so can you. The 10th bite at the apple. In 2997, the Free Worlds League once again sought to hobble Defiance's production. This time, instead of smashing into the main production complex in the mountains, the Free Worlds League units would instead target outlying bunkers, warehouses, and subcontractor locations. This would throw a wrench into Defiance's finely tuned supply chains and possibly trigger extensive delays in Battlemech production. The plan fell apart almost immediately when the planet's network of early warning systems were activated and the defending forces had more than enough time to shift resources. The 10th Lyran Guards, led by Colonel Katrina Steiner, executed a suborbital drop directly into the bulk of the Free Worlds League forces, causing chaos and routing them in less than an hour of fighting. With their plans in tatters, the Free Worlds League force retreated and fled from the system. Though the Lyrans had decisively won, the wrong lesson was learned by Archon Alessandro, who was confident that the planet would not be under great threat anytime soon. He pulled 3 of the planet's 5 mech regiments for use in an attack on Kalidasa and replaced them with less than 2 regiments of Eridani Light Horse under contract. As the Lyran forces were bogged down on Kalidasa, 2 raids on Hesperis II between 2998 and 3000 strained the ELH and Defiance defense forces. Though they were able to repulse the attacks both times, the mech production lines suffered significant damage. The economic and production impact caused a scandal within the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces and prompted a serious reconsideration of how safe Hesperus II really was. Mismanagement by Lieutenant General Wilhelm Mautheim during the 2 recent raids led to the Eridani Lighthorse choosing not to renew their contract with the Lyrans in December of 3000. This placed even more pressure on the Archon to come up with adequate defense of such an important world. His solution involved pulling units from the interior of Lyran space and sending them to border worlds in what was called concentrated weakness. While it did provide some measure of security on those reinforced worlds, the plans ended up causing internal strife which ultimately cost Alessandro his Archonship. Broken Record. Janos Merrick, Lord of the Free Worlds League and holder of the Dragoons' contract, had sent them to Hesperus II in an attempt to cow the Lyrans into quiet along the battered Merrick border. No enemy had ever damaged the Defiance Industries complex in combat. Simple entropy had done more damage to the once great Terran hegemony facilities than enemy action ever had. The Dragoons had fought their way across the lower half of the Lyran Commonwealth to get here. Hector, by Jason Schmetzer. The 13th Battle of Hesperus offered Wolf's Dragoons the opportunity to smash the infamous mercenary unit up against the Lyran and Defiance defenders in June of 3019. The element of surprise was lost as an informant among the Dragoons' ranks sent word of the raid and the Lyrans bulked up Hesperus' defenses. The 3rd Royal Guards, 24th Lyran Guards, and 2 additional Merc units were there on planet to greet the Dragoons upon their arrival. One of those Merc units was the legendary Hansen's Rough Riders, so it was clear the Lyrans weren't messing around. The Dragoon raid on the Defiance complex was making headway, especially when Natasha Kerensky spotted a less defended path through the Steiner defensive network. Only a last-minute intervention by the Rough Riders prevented a breakthrough into the Defiance grounds. Both sides suffered greatly as a result of the fight, with the 24th Lyran Guards being nearly completely wiped out. Wolf's Dragoons would not be the last mercenary unit tasked with cracking the Hesperus II nut. Nearly a decade later, in 3028, Makaran's armored cavalry attempted to raid the planet. This time, however, they landed on the northern Whitman continent and hit the Kincaid Defiance Industries factory rather than the main complex on South Whitman. In what appeared to be an attempt to settle a grudge over some stolen money, Barton's regiment of the Big Mac attacked the factory lines. However, the entire mission was actually meant to help Simon Kincaid escape justice when he learned the Lyrans had info showing he was embezzling a large share of brand new prototype double heatsinks to sell to the Capellans. So while the raid was generally considered a success, its true purpose was not to cause widespread destruction. There would be more battles. The Dragoons were hurt, but not broken. No one could ask for more of any unit. They had fought the Lyrans to within sight of the factories of Defiance Industries. From the lack of sharp contacts, the dropship was getting airborne, and he knew the Dragoons' aerospace was up to the task of escorting them to the jump point, and the jump ships would carry them back to Sterling. Hector, by Jason Schmetzer. Machines of War. While a lot of digital ink has now been expended covering attempts to stop Defiance from continuing to function, it's helpful for our understanding of Hesperus II and Defiance Industries to discuss what they were actually producing over these many centuries. The assembly lines have produced some of the most well-known and feared classic Battlemech designs, as well as some brand new Battlemechs at a time that many assumed that was impossible. Not to be forgotten, Defiance vehicles of Hesperus continued to produce armored vehicles, including in-house designs which became a mainstay of Lyran Armed Forces garrison units across the realm. Mech warriors as well as civilians could see Defiance produced Atlases, Archers, Enforcers, and Zeuses defending the Lyran Commonwealth in countless holovids. Later on in the timeline, the Hatchetman, Night Sky, and Salamander ushered in a new generation of big stompy might. Defiance engineers and designers continually pushed the limits of the technology available, especially after the discovery of the Helm memory core in the Clan Invasion, when the company invested heavily in new variants and designs to take fullest advantage. Even as the Lyran Commonwealth, then the Federated Commonwealth, faced great peril, the lines had to keep producing in order to keep everything from falling apart. Though we can't cover them all, I do want to highlight 2 battlemechs that are good examples of Defiance's efforts to keep pushing forward with mech production. The first is the HCT-3F Hatchetman, which was dreamed up at the New Avalon Institute of Science, but actually constructed on Hesperus II at the Defiance complex. Production began in 3023, and soon the 45-ton mech sporting Defiance-produced autocannons and lasers was distributed to Lyran and Federated Suns units. It demonstrated that it was possible for a new battlemech design to be viable. As new technologies were developed, Defiance updated the Hatchetman to keep it in the fight. As a result, it became as readily identifiable on the battlefield as the other classic mech designs. Not to be outdone, Hesperus vehicles sought to create their own new tank design in the 3020s. The resulting 65-ton Rommel patent tanks once again highlighted the in-house produced tech. The Defiance Mech Hunter autocannon and Killer Type T demonstrated power and reliability. Unlike some other companies out there, the Defiance label assures quality. The first Rommels and Pattons rolled off the assembly lines on Hesperus II in 3027 and quickly became a mainstay of garrison forces across the Federated Commonwealth and beyond. The design was lauded for its sleek profile, speed, and ability to bring near mech-level fire onto a target. For units that wanted powerful machinery but couldn't justify the expense of a battlemech, the Pattons and Rommels offered a viable option. The 3020s through early 3050s were a boom time for Defiance and Hesperus II. Profits were up and there seemed no end to the demand for new products. The arrival of the clans in the Inner Sphere lit a fire under the company's leadership to further increase production as the Federated Commonwealth fought for survival against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Rough seas ahead. People would look back at the exciting early 3050s with reverence as cracks began to form in the Federated Commonwealth. The added drama of yet another rebellion in Sky complicated supply lines and threatened production at Defiance. A war declaration from the Free Worlds League and compelling confederation further muddied the waters. To appreciate the good times, often there needed to be bad times, and the bad times were coming. The invasion included an assault on Hesperus II, which became known as the 15th Battle of Hesperus. This time, in addition to Defiance's standard defense units, the Grey Death Legion stood in the way of the attacking forces. Arriving in June of 3057, the GDL, now led by Lowry Carlisle, became the only serious opposition against Sky separatist forces designated the 22nd Sky Rangers, which show up and tried to wrestle the planet away from Lyran control. The fight was brutal and nearly wiped out the Grey Death Legion as the battle moved into the Defiance complex itself. "All right, Lieutenant, pull back." Brewer felt an icy weight in the pit of his stomach. As he stared hopelessly around him, he noticed that none of the original Legionnaires remained. The heart and soul of the Grey Death Legion was gone. A volley of missile fire rocked his champion. In an instant, the despair vanished in a bright, white-hot flame of anger and the thirst for revenge. He snapped his mech's weapons into line, tripped the targeting interlock circuits, and fired. The Dying Time by Thomas S. Gressman. The Lyrans managed to cling to Hesperus II, and the defeat took the wind out of the Second Sky Rebellion. Having held out against the Free Worlds League and Capellan Confederation, the Lyran Commonwealth had once again endured tremendous damage and survived. The Defiance complex would once again be repaired and put to the task of rearming the realm. The FedCom civil war that finally turned simmering distrust and renewed nationalism into open conflict did not spare Hesperus II. The 5-year conflict turned allies into enemies and burned across dozens of worlds that once made up the backbone of the first real attempt to join two states through diplomacy since the creation of the Star League. Hesperus II became a valuable poker chip as Victor Steiner Davion and Catherine Steiner Davion sought to outmaneuver each other. Victor secured Coventry and Ilarion, while Tharkad and Hesperus II fed Catherine's war machine. An attempt by Sky separatists to contest control of Hesperus came to nothing but the collapse of yet another Sky independence movement. Units like the 17th and 22nd Sky Rangers were devastated on the same ground as so many others as they tried and failed to take from the Lyrans. The Kerfuffle. Despite the environmental soup, the jungle's thick, humid air pounded against his body like a hammer, while the chirping, hissing sounds of Hesperus' native life filled his ears. He hated wearing the helmet almost as much as he wished it had come with a sound filter. Putting the binoculars on his faceplate, Marcus could already hear the little motors in his helmet struggling to keep the sweltering heat from cooking his head. God, I hate wearing this thing. He started scanning the tree line, hoping to catch a glimpse of Hans or Stefan, but a slight flurry of movement within the jungle caught his attention. Not sure what it was, he tried to zoom in, but the thick foliage revealed nothing. Whatever it was bigger than a Komodo and moving slowly toward his position. He lowered his glasses. Probably one of those fat belly snakes, Marcus thought. Last Patrol, Turning Points, Hesperis II, by Joshua C. Perrion. When the word of Blake jumped into the Hesperus system in March of 3068, Defiance Industries on Hesperus had seen better days. The FedCom civil war had caused significant damage not just to the planet's defenses but the assembly lines themselves, lowering output and impacting the bottom line. The bleakest operation, Steel Hammer, presented the greatest threat the planet had ever experienced at a time when its residents and the corporation were least able to defend themselves. Instead of massing in a large offensive operation, the Blakists adopted a different strategy of using small raids to accomplish specific goals that stifled production and tested the planet's defenses. It started with an attack by the 16th Division against the Dorscheid electronics factory, which produced sensor systems for mechs and vehicles. The modest Dorscheid defense force was wiped out along with the factory. Additional raids targeted outlying defensive positions, isolating the Defiance complex from outside intel. Strike teams were also deposited with the goal of infiltrating the planet's defensive networks for sabotage before the arrival of the main Blakist strike force. The defending 15th Lyran Guards and the Defiance Self-Protection Force led by Duke Daniel Brewer were not ignorant of what was happening, but had limited options once things kicked off. The Hesperus Planetary Militia consisted of just infantry and light vehicles and were poorly equipped at this point in the timeline. The 15th Lyran Guards struggled to respond quickly to the Blakist attacks as they were plagued with an inflexible leadership system that invited exploitation. All of this was a boon for the word of Blake, who intended not to destroy the Defiance complex but to become the permanent new masters of Hesperis II. The dawn of 3070, the Word of Blake assault fleet jumped into the Hesperus system, led by a level 2 of pocket warships. They quickly cleared Hesperis II's orbit of defending Lyran assets and began to land ground forces. This included both the 38th Division and the 40th Shadow Division, which both outclassed and outnumbered their defenders. The defense was slow to respond, and the efforts were complicated by acts of sabotage from the infiltration teams which had been keeping a low profile until this moment. The 15th Lyran Guards were forced to retreat into the Defiance complex, hoping that the mountainous terrain and long-standing defensive network could save them from the wrath of the Word of Blake. In just 14 days, on February 19, 3070, Hesperis II fell to the Blakists. Over the next 4 years, the Word of Blake turned the Defiance complex and other factories on the planet to the task of bolstering their own forces. The Lyrans had been cut off from the second most important industrial planet in the realm for the first time in its history. It wasn't until Devlin Stone's coalition forces, consisting of Comstar and Clan Wolf units, that the planet would see its freedom from Blakist domination. It proved to be a painful reconquest, and much of Maria's elegy was destroyed in a street-by-street fight. The Wolf Delta Galaxy warriors became enraged at the Blakist tactics, which they deemed dishonorable. The attack devolved into multiple sieges, first around the city, then the Defiance complex in those famous Mayu Mountains. The last of the Blakist holdouts hid in Maria's elegy and put up a ferocious fight before ultimately retreating to hidden dropships that took the remnants of the 40th Shadow Division up into orbit. Hesperis II. The very name evokes a strange sense of desire. Like the primal emotion to procreate or possess a toy you were denied as a child. There is an intense craving to exercise ownership over this place, despite soil drenched in hundreds of years of blood and death, or perhaps in spite of it. The challenge to conquer the unconquerable is a strong one. So many have tried, and so many have failed in their conquests of greed. That is why we will succeed. We do not reclaim Hesperis II for riches, but for humanity. Blake's blessed are bringing Hesperis II home. recorded statement from a Word of Blake acolyte. The aftermath. When the smoke cleared following the Word of Blake kerfuffle, the great houses of the Inner Sphere, periphery states, and even the clans were rattled. Hesperis II had experienced extensive damage to both urban areas and the factory complexes, significantly reducing output. Even factories that did not sustain direct damage were limited by supply chain disruptions. It's difficult to meet production goals on complex machines when parts from subcontractors either show up in limited numbers or not at all because the subcontractor's factory and employees no longer exist. Daniel Brewer, Duke of Hesperis II during the Word of Blake occupation, suffered the shame of being the first brewer to lose the planet to occupying forces, but never gave up on the company or his employees. As the Blakists attacked, he made the fateful decision to remain on the planet and fight against the occupiers in his own way. He ended up under house arrest, choosing to play the part of the calm presence in order to prevent his people from rising up in futile actions that would only get them wiped out. He kept contact with Archon Adam Steiner and later Devlin Stone in order to pass on intelligence and to understand the lay of the land in nearby systems. Following the liberation of the planet, Duke Brewer committed to rebuilding the plant's production and reinforcing its defense against any possible future threats. This was not an easy task, as the Blakists left plenty of booby traps and systems corrupted by computer viruses that needed to be safely cleared before troubleshooting could begin. Damage estimates in December of 3079 placed the Defiance complex on Hesperis II at roughly 80% of its previous peak before the FedCom Civil War and Word of Blake occupation. Dorscheid was much harder hit, suffering nearly 80% of its production capacity destroyed, and now only up to 35% of the previous peak. On the bright side, the Word of Blake left plenty of high-tech equipment behind following their defeat on Hesperus, so the engineering teams at Defiance and other companies could begin to tinker for possible new products. The reconstruction brought growth with it in the post-Blakist years, with the population reaching a startling 345,600 people. Modest investment from the Lyran state as well as other customers fueled reconstruction and the growth of job opportunities. By this point, the pantheon of Defiance products had expanded well beyond the Archer, Atlas, and Hatchetman. Newer designs like the Atlas II, Thunderfox, and Eisenfaust demonstrated the company had not given up on innovation. One important shift in battlefield philosophy was the use of battle-armored infantry. One of the vehicle production lines at the Defiance complex was shifted over to produce the new Inner Sphere pattern battle armor, which had been incredibly popular. Rumors swirled that brand new designs featuring Blakist and clan technology would soon be stomping off the assembly lines to revitalize the Lyran armed forces. Dawn of a new era. Hesperus' story, as always, is inexorably tied to the fate of the Lyran Commonwealth. As everyone who was still alive at that point marched into the 32nd century, troubles remained plentiful for the Lyran people. The threat of the Word of Blake may have passed, but increasingly aggressive clanners and the chaotic Free Worlds League presented consistent headaches. The Lyran economy had been running on vapors for decades, and more than a few regional leaders fashioned themselves as rising powers in the face of weak Lyran leadership. Grey Monday hit, and that further damaged an already fragile trade network. The state had lost dozens of worlds, and there was little the LCAF could do about it. But other than that, things were just going great. Archon Melissa Steiner's plan to ally with Clan Wolf and then use them to create a buffer state between the Lyrans and the Free Worlds League did not work out as planned, as the Wolves proved impossible to leash. The migration in early 3137 shipped as much of Clan Wolf's assets as possible across the Commonwealth while keeping a very low profile. The Lyran Wolf assault on the Free Worlds League assets continued until the Wolves realized that they were being treated as fodder, softening up targets so that the Lyrans could sweep in and make claims on the planets. This, along with evidence of mistreatment of Clan Wolf citizens, led to a fateful decision by the Wolves to sign a ceasefire with the Free Worlds League and instead turn and attack Lyran forces. While all of this didn't directly impact Hesperis II, it triggered a series of events that would eventually bring the clans to the system, looking to claim the planet's production for themselves. Realizing that the Wolves had abandoned their occupation zone and the Lyrans were busy with their fight against the Free Worlds League, the Jade Falcons, along with the Hell's Horses, began to gobble up Wolf OZ planets and then rapidly push into Lyran space. Malvina Hazen's rise to power was swift and brutal, and she wasn't going to be placated by offers of ceasefires or pesky things like proper conduct in war. Ultimately, it became clear that Hesperus was a target, and the IlKhan decided to gamble on pitting the Jade Falcons and Wolves against each other. She leaked info to Alaric Ward showing that the Falcons were on the verge of taking the industrial world. This was too much of a threat to ignore, and Alaric began shifting his forces to also make a play to take Hesperus. The Lyrans were unable to properly protect the planet at this point, so the defense fell to the Eridani Lighthorse as garrison, backed up by some smaller mercenary units, modest local militia, and a company of the 3rd Royal Guards. When the Falcons and Hell's Horses dropped onto Hesperus in January of 3145, the garrison and 3rd Royal put up only light resistance before fleeing the planet, leaving only the Eridani Lighthorse and a few other units to protect South Whitman. When the smaller Merc units broke and attempted to surrender, Malvina's Falcons butchered them anyway. The ELH tried to fall back into the Defiance complex but were denied entry. That betrayal left only a mad dash attempt to break through the clan lines to reach the Eridani dropships in Maria's Elegy. Unfortunately for the Eridani Lighthorse, the Falcons were able to cut them off and prevent the breakthrough. A few survivors fled into the mountains, but most, if not all, were hunted down over the next few weeks. The next stage of the IlKhan's gambit began with the arrival of a clan wolf fleet in the system, which quickly landed and set upon the Jade Falcons and Hell's Horses. After 2 additional months of fighting, all 3 participants were bloodied and unable to make headway to finish their conquest. This was exactly what the IlKhan wanted, as a large Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces fleet gathered in the Cannonbee system and waited for the clanners to pummel each other to dust. When intel showed that Malvina was openly discussing the use of nuclear weaponry to just destroy the Defiance complex so that no one could have it, the LCAF made their move. On February 23rd, Malvina's Falcons made a last-ditch attempt to smash through the Wolves and to take the Defiance complex. In the fray, Khan Beckett Malthus tried to assassinate Malvina, which caused chaos in the Falcon and Hell's Horses ranks. At the same time that the clan's forces were scattering, the Lyrans began to drop into the fray. At full strength and rested, the Lyrans smashed through all 3 clans and forced their retreat. Archon Trillian Steiner had won an unexpected victory over Alaric Ward and Malvina Hazen, which reinforced her leadership and retained the Defiance lines, which remained crucial for the survival of the Commonwealth. In the IlKhan era. The future of Hesperis II and Defiance Industries is as up in the air at the moment as is much of the rest of the Inner Sphere. Alaric's new Star League, Wolf Empire, and Capellan Confederation are all closer than would be preferred. The current Duke Brewer has been building local alliances and using his connections with Defiance to build a self-sufficient series of systems. What will come of that with the defense by the Hesperus Guards is an open question. It's unlikely that Archon Steiner will stand by and let Defiance's production march off into a breakaway region. Defiance Industries has continually rebuilt and pushed forward with new technologies to maintain the edge over anyone who might represent a threat. Designs like the ZEU X4 Zeus X feature composite frames, extra light engines, and an in-house produced X pulse laser. Classic Battlemech designs like the Atlas have also continually received upgrades. The newest variant, an AS-8S Atlas, features a clan-spec 300XL engine, compact gyro, and a collection of powerful clan-spec weaponry, including extended-range large lasers. The improved heavy Gauss rifle split between the right and center torso is massive, but also guaranteed to leave an impression if you get a bead on a target. Whatever happens in the region in the next few years, Defiance Industries on Hesperus is likely to be in the thick of it, producing as much equipment as possible to fuel the fight for not just a stronger bottom line, but also the cause of stability and security. If you're looking to make an investment in your future, contact a friendly Defiance representative on Hesperus, Tharkad, or any of the major markets near you. We're looking forward to your message. Thank you so much for coming out today. This was a big project, and getting it done during a rather scary time with wildfire dangers, evacuations, and so on and so forth was sure a thing. If you think the video deserves it and you want to show your support, the easiest way to do that is to hit the like button, subscribe, and even leave a comment. All of those things make the YouTube algorithm very happy. If you want to go one step further, direct support through Ko-fi is ideal, and the link is in the video notes. Though YouTube channel memberships are still a thing and very appreciated, it's nice not to have to rely entirely on Google's good graces moving forward. No matter what, it is appreciated. Without strong community support, this would not be possible. If you'd like to join the nonsense and even share your own painted Battlemechs for future videos, join the Discord server where people get the heads up on what's coming next and have a chance to chat about all things BattleTech. With that, I'll say thanks again, and please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.